Hi, welcome to the 100th show of Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, your host, and today I'll be your guide through a look back at a number of those shows. You know, our very first show was taped in October of 1992, and you may recall that was a fairly important time for our community and for the country, and as it turned out, for the world. Why? Well, there was an election going on, and George Bush I was running for re-election, but some of us had another guy in mind. This first show was called simply Election 92.
I actually think it's historic. I think it's the most important election in the history of our community. Everything's at stake. It's like we have the Prince of Darkness and the Prince of Light. On one side, we have a person who will practice and continue to practice repression, do little on AIDS, appoint more Clarence Thomases to the Supreme Court, take away a woman's right to choose. And on the other side, we have a candidate who is committed to passing progressive civil rights legislation and executive orders for gays and lesbians, who will declare war on AIDS, who will appoint distinguished people to the Supreme Court of this land and the federal court, other federal judiciary appointments, and who will fight hard to protect Roe versus Wade in the process.
A Clinton victory sends out a green light from the top. It puts leadership stamp on tolerance, on homophobia, as unacceptable as a form of bigotry. We always say homophobia has become sort of the last acceptable form of bigotry. Doesn't mean racism and sexism are dead, but homophobia has been the last to fall. And with leadership that is, you know, explicitly pro-gay rights on certain issues, what it does is it means we get to move forward on the issues that we have public support for, discrimination, the military, and so forth. But more importantly, it opens up for the 90s the political space for us to really move forward on domestic partnership and gay marriage, on gay youth, gay and lesbian youth issues, teenage suicide, you know, 3 times the national average. And so what you'll see is a totally changed terrain. Not only will you see a queer voting bloc, I mean, it is conceivable that 85 to 90% of our community, both Republicans and Democrats are going to vote as a bloc in this election. The kind of money that's been raised in this campaign, and the way that this campaign, as Charles and David were saying, has really acted in our interest to galvanize and mobilize our own community. Thousands of unactive people have been brought in.
I think that heretofore we've been able to play a symbolic role. We've been involved, we've supported Democratic candidates in the past, but we haven't been able to go with the candidate the distance. Now we're beginning to taste victory, and I think that that's important and significant, and it's something we've earned, it's something we deserve. And so now it's just making it to the end, making sure that the candidate wins, and that we are there to make it clear to everyone, to remember ourselves and to remind the world that we're here, we're not going anywhere, so get used to it.
Tell us, why was this an important convention, if it was, for the gay and lesbian community?
It was surprising to all of us who were openly gay and lesbian delegates to the Democratic National Convention that we would have such a position of prominence at the convention, as well as in the minds and hearts of the media and of, I think, people across the country.
But also we had some presence, I think, in drafting the platform. I know you were involved.
But we had a greater impact on the formulation of the platform and of the battle within the party to get the platform accepted as the governing document than we ever have before. We were viewed as a very significant force.
As you'll see over the next hour, our show covered a lot of different issues. Many times we were pretty deep and pretty serious. Other times, well... Listen, let me ask you a question just to sort of start this.
And I'd just like to say that picture of you it's you. I mean, perfect.
That was before my latest haircut. Do you like my new haircut?
But that is definitely.
I did not know. I did notice. I did notice.
I got all my haircut.
But there you are. This is the first lesbian in a vest. The great thing for me was when I started, because my person who managed me, and just act like you're interested.
I'm listening.
Okay. It's good, but we won't get into hair care products now because
Not yet.
this is a good show.
Because this is not
and
that channel.
It's not that shallow, actually, even though we started off that way.
Kate, you were one of the first people talking about being queer out there.
Well,
I mean, there weren't a lot of women
Yeah.
out there doing it.
Well,
But see,
and
the
not
great
only
thing-
talking about it, but making people understand it, because, I mean, you always have been the funniest person in the universe, not just in this genre.
My goodness.
I mean, truly, don't you think?
I used to get a galactic thing happening, but okay, it's all right, Sheila. I know there are other people you like now. But I think one of the things about coming out that, you know, is so annoying to me and wonderful is that the waste of human energy that we spend on it that could be spent somewhere else.
Worrying about it in advance. You know, I've sort of compared it to that. There was an old Shell oil commercial where you saw a car hurtling toward a brick wall, and you think any minute it's going to impact, and it drives right through, and it's just a piece of paper that looks like a brick wall. And coming out is sort of like that, but the apprehension that you feel before you do it, how is it going to impact? I mean, you had to wonder, I would
Sure,
assume.
I did, and I used to put a lot more energy into it, and it's ironic that sort of that thing, as soon as you stop thinking about it, it happens, you know what I mean? And I talked about this in sort of the big coming out interview that I did with The Advocate, which is it happened on the anniversary. I got that phone call, you know, that infamous, that call from representation saying, you know, it's going to be a national, you know, some trashy publication, and it was on the anniversary of my brother's death, and you know, sometimes that impacts your life. You know, these anniversaries can, and it's like sometimes they blow by. This happened to be one that I was having some awareness of and was thoughtful about, and when that phone call came, it was like, oh, who cares? You know, because in the grand scheme of things, it just really didn't have any weight.
Why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep doing community work and coming to community banquets and saying yes to these things and being on the air and saying, okay, I will talk about this?
Well, it's not my line, but somebody said, you know, now that there's no more communism, the religious right is just glommed on to the gay community with such venom and hate, and until that goes away, until that dissipates greatly, I mean, there is still the purpose for our well-being and our children and our children's children to be able to live our lives truthfully and honestly and presently without condemnation, you know.
Now more than ever.
Yeah.
You know?
That's why.
We're Jewish. We have to give back, you know? You have to give back.
Kate Clinton. I know you're a good Catholic schoolgirl, still inside.
Co-Jewish.
Kind of a co-Jewish. Well, even though we kept a light touch on many of the shows, others dealt with some of the most pressing and serious issues of our day. Religion, spirituality, preserving our history, countering right-wing propaganda, and the fact that you don't have to be gay to be queer.
And so I kept trying to fit in with everybody and getting people to like me, and they didn't. I mean, you know, the harder you try, the more they sort of push you away. And it wasn't until I finally, one summer, went to a performing arts camp, and all of a sudden, there was this whole group of people who were not just literally queer, but they were outsiders, and we were all there together. And I understood what I'd been wanting for so long was not just to fit in, but to contribute and make a difference and find a cohesive family that I knew that I was part of. I was overweight. I was weird. People didn't understand me. And so when I look at your community, I feel extremely empathetic. I know what it feels like to be prejudiced against, pushed aside, discounted. And what I so love about the community is the willingness to be courageous in being who you are.
Given the tetrahedron configuration, does that mean that each one of you feels you have an independent relationship with each of the other three?
Absolutely.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, but was that hard or kind of just not so hard?
It's hard. It's difficult.
Go, Robert.
That's good. I'm still working on mine.
All three of them.
Yeah.
But the truth is that you have as much of a relationship with each of us as each of us does with each other. Yours is of a different nature.
Mm-hmm.
our connections are powerful. I mean, you resist.
Yeah.
You resist talking the Herb and Jonathan stuff. But your connection with, my experience is that my relationship with you is every bit as powerful as my relationship with Judith. It's just of a different nature.
One of the things that we've often talked about is that because Robert is here and willing to hang in, it's a very unusual position for a straight man. To me, I have a lot of respect for him for being willing to be in a situation, and many times Herb and Jonathan have said to him, particularly Herb has said, you have to understand that you are a model for the straight community off of your relationship with two gay men, because it is an unusual relationship, and that's to go back to your point about what we're talking about this being exemplary. I think each one of us in our own individual way is exemplary, and as a group we are exemplary.
I realized recently, or actually about a few years ago, that most of the men that I knew that I were connected to were gay, because they were willing to share and talk. And Herb said, you need to get into a men's group. And I resisted that for about a year or two. And finally get into a men's group where I think there are 1 or 2 gay men in it, but mostly are straight guys. And it's an interesting experience for me to be around straight guys and to have a conversation and to be willing to push ourselves through that to talk about real issues.
I saw and was completely inspired by the gay agenda. I was so upset when I saw it. I thought it was very slick, very effective, of course full of lies and distortions. And I got really depressed, and then I thought, no, you know, we've got to do something about this, or I could be really depressed, or I could do something about it, and I decided to do something about it, and talked to award-winning filmmaker Francis Reed, and together we made the film, and it ended up being the first pro-gay. You talked about the gay agenda being distributed among at the Congress, and this was Straight from the Heart was the first pro-gay lesbian film that was shown to an audience of senators and congresspeople, bipartisan audience.
And the Academy got to view it too.
That's right. Yeah, it was nominated for an Academy Award as well.
Through going to the Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, part of becoming a sexologist was to look at all kinds of sex educational films, and I would say 95% of them were rotten. They're just boring and terrible, and I said, oh, I know I can do better than this. So I decided to start doing my own films, not necessarily sex education films, but more of the documentary about African American lesbian and gay people. And I convinced them to have, as part of my dissertation work, to do a video on black lesbians, and then I done others, like for the Black Gay and Lesbian Leadership Forum, We Have a Legacy, which is a history of historical and contemporary African American lesbian and gay people. One definition I read about art is that the purpose of art is to make the comfortable uncomfortable and to make the uncomfortable comfortable. Heterosexism is comfortable, and homophobia or dealing with sexuality is sometimes very uncomfortable. And so if you use art to make people more, I guess, calm and sane, and at least trying to discuss it instead of going crazy, as some people do, I think that's very helpful, and that's a very good use of art.
Yeah, and I think that's what we are trying to do. I talked about using this as sort of a starting point for a conversation about what is obviously a very difficult issue, and that is homophobia and heterosexism. And we purposefully made them both under 30 minutes, so people could sit, people with, like most of us, with a short attention span, and sit. And then what we want to do is go around the country and actually train local activists how to sit with those folks, watch the film, and then facilitate a really meaningful discussion about people's fears and concerns.
This is without question the world's largest repository of historical material documenting the experience of gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered people on the planet. The One Institute and Archives is the preeminent institution of memory on planet Earth. in terms of gay and lesbian experience.
Now, how did the strands come together to form this institute?
Well, again, we're talking about 1,001 stories and going from the personal to the collective, as you might say, and that's how this collection started. In 1942, a very dear man by the name of Jim Kepner started acquiring the first books in his San Francisco apartment, and the collection just grew and grew and grew and grew over the years.
We touch their lives, we touch their beings. It makes it to be not an academic thing, but a real living thing, so that people can come here, no different than the tourists who now go to my family ranch and they get a picture that's very different from what you see on television as far as ranching. People can come here, instead of getting the television picture, they get the real feeling of what it was really like to be gay and to be in the closet in the 1940s and 50s, a time when you couldn't associate openly with other gay people, you couldn't send things through the mail, you couldn't dance with other people socially. There were all of these things that we're able to do today that were against the law then. And this is a place where that all comes alive, and so we get that perspective and that measure and that livingness of history, where we came from and where we are now.
I remember in the early 80s specific instances where there was a painter or a photographer or a poet whose parents came in, quick, especially when these deaths were quick. Parents came in and obliterated everything. There's nothing left. Their art is gone. There is no their poetry is evaporated. Their paintings have been burned. Their words are lost forever. That won't happen now. People will have the foresight to make sure that these works of art are preserved. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it, which is so emotional to me and so moving, is that so many of my dead brethren are alive in this room. I mean, and will not die as a result of being on these bookshelves, in the photo collections. They will be immortal in this space. And we know also that a lot of gay and lesbian people, the point was made eloquently by Karen Oakham, and I'm not going to steal it from her, but that a lot of gays and lesbians don't have children. They don't have a trusting, loving family to leave their things to. This is the place for it to go. They don't want to die not knowing where some of their treasures are going to go, some of their paintings, whether they're artists or not, some of the things that they've collected that are pertinent to our lives and our lifestyles.
One of the recurring themes we saw as we looked back through these shows was identifying issues of interest not only to our community, but to the larger world as well. And not only looking at the problems, but also trying to identify solutions and strategies as well.
What is racism, to us as a community? I think that you're absolutely right that many gay and lesbian people believe that our community is more progressive on the question of race, because they believe that when you talk about racism, you talk about burning people's homes, you talk about violent attacks, and certainly that is a part of racism. And if it is sufficient to just eliminate those activities and to say we've eliminated those activities in our community on the question of race, therefore we've eliminated the whole issue of racism, that's a mistake. That in fact is not enough. The elimination of racism really involves creating a society and a culture and a community that truly reflects the diversity of that society, that culture, that community, that truly celebrates and includes each and every one of us and understands that we have valuable contributions.
We've seen racism evolve in the lesbian and gay community. We've gone from requiring people of color to produce 3-picture IDs to get into a bar. That was at one time, and now we've seen it evolve into the systematic exclusion of people of color in the decision-making process, and I think that's the worst form of racism in our community. Our biggest challenge is to start addressing these problems, because before we can start demanding rights from other people, we need to get our own house in order. And I think this, forums like this are very positive.
Differences are okay, and they're okay to address them. And it's okay to not be okay with addressing them, just as long as they're out in the open and we're not invisible and we're not made to feel, like as women we're made to feel a lot of times, that it's all in our heads. That's where a lot of my anger comes from, is that invisibility and that feeling like I don't have anyone that really mirrors me in my community. So I start from ground one, and I want to become that person for other people like me, other young Latina lesbians or whoever they may be. Because one turning point for me when I came out was meeting an Asian American lesbian. And I said, well, you know, there's Asian American lesbians, there must be Latina lesbians. That was really a big turning point. I would not deal with being a lesbian, or I didn't deal with being a lesbian until I met someone of color. So that mirror, that someone that looks like you, is very important.
Why all this homophobia in the military?
Well, I think the military is the good old boys club, and they had problems with anybody who wasn't quite like the white patriarchal male. They had problems with blacks and other people of color, and certainly the language to prohibit them is close to the same kind of language that they used to prohibit gay men and lesbians. And they really had problems placing women in full use, and still are having problems with women in combat. So racism, sexism, homophobia, all birds of a, you know, the same stick, so to speak, birds of a feather flock together.
I go to Capitol Hill, and I've been traveling all over the country for the Campaign for Military Service, organizing people to prepare for this vote. And every question I go, especially by the local press, is what is the homosexual agenda? You know, like, I don't know, let me see, where is it here? You know?
Well, they've seen the tape,
and
that's why.
And I say, we do have an agenda. We do have an agenda. I said, I fess up. I admit we have an agenda. And that is, we want the same protection under the Constitution of the United States that's given to every other American citizen, no more, no less. And that includes the ability to serve our country with dignity and honor, and not have to lie, and not have to live in fear for the right to serve our country.
The military is very, very guilty of double standards. When there is a war, they tend to relook at who they have disinducted out of the Army.
That's right.
During the Second World War, they were looking at reinducting gay men who had been put out of the Army because they were gay, if they had not done any public homosexual offenses. So, I mean, the double standard has been there from the very beginning, and it's who you listen to and what side of the fence you want to sit on. And all we're saying is, let's get rid of the fence and let's all sit together.
We're going to talk about the National Endowment for the Arts, public broadcasting system, and the new contract on America, which seems to want to defund not only these entities but others. A question that we'll hopefully explore today is what's going on about this, and in terms of the fact that it seems to many of us that our community is being used as a wedge issue on all of this defunding discussion.
The importance of federal support, it's a very complex issue, and you know, we'll have to weave in and out of some of those complexities in the show today, but that is accountable to the mandate of our country to represent all of the people that are living here. And so this is in a nutshell, what they want to do is basically turn culture over entirely to the commercial domain and to market forces, and to prevent agencies such as the NEA providing support for artists who are pushing the envelope of consciousness.
The actual effect of defunding organizations like the NEA is that it will simply be harder for artists who don't have inherited money or access to wealthy patrons to spend full-time on their art. And actually, I think that what the conservative right is after, given the kind of economy that they're pushing, in which there is going to be no middle class, there's going to be the very rich and the very poor, is to create a situation in which people who perceive of themselves as ordinary folks, working people, won't aspire to an artistic life, and in fact art will become the province of the elite, because I think that what these folks are after is lowering poor people's expectations of the amount of joy and fulfillment and self-expression that a working person is entitled to in life.
The first crucial building block where I understood who I was
as a gay 14-year-old in the San Gabriel Valley was by watching KCET and seeing a Trinity theater production of a play about Oscar Wilde called Feasting with Panthers. And suddenly there on TV, you know, sitting in, you know, on the deep pile shag carpeting, I'm seeing something that immediately registered as, wow, that is me. This is like, there's a history, there's a culture, there's a tragedy, because this great wrong that was done to one of, you know, our great queer writers, Oscar Wilde. And it was like 5,000 light bulbs going on in my head at that moment. And it's, you know, I was actually reading, I'm writing about this right now, and I was reading in my journal, which of course I was keeping at 14.
Of course.
About every experience. That's how performance artists are made. But I think actually they don't want those light bulbs to be turned on, and that's part of where this war is so crucial. And they're very canny. It's dangerous for them to those light bulbs to be turned on. By keeping Marlon Riggs' extraordinary film, Tongues Untied, about the experience of African American gay men, an incredibly silenced and large population in our society, and by keeping that off of 2/3 of the markets, they kept some X number of powerful light bulbs being turned on over these, you know, queer young black men's heads all over this country. And that's an incredible and shameful victory for them, because it's going to create, you know, massive ongoing self-esteem problems, silencing, closetedness, disempowerment, all of the things which of course are right along the right-wing agenda, especially as it relates to lesbians and gay men.
We've become a country, I think, that wants instant change in whatever it is that's troubling us. And government is slower than that. And so at the next 2 years they say, we asked you for this, you didn't give us this, off with their heads. I do think, though, that there is a trend back, maybe away from the radical right. I think Newton Company gave everybody a really good view of what that would look like. And I think that's why Clinton was reelected, in part. And I think that has a lot to do with the radical right's social agenda. I think they've done better on their economic front than they've done on their social agenda, but they can't get, it's like holding the tiger by the tail. They can't give up the social agenda or they lose a huge block of their voters. So they hold on to this social agenda, which includes homophobia and all of the other phobias that they're scatter around with their every breath. And the problem is that whole bunches of people in America just don't buy that stuff anymore.
I think the challenge is, for the left in general, whatever the heck that is, for progressive forces in general, and for the gay and lesbian communities, how do we move beyond our own issue? How do we have meaningful coalitions, you know, that really mean something? And how do we forge a vision, which the right wing will never be able to do, that speaks to the best, that speaks out beyond our own self-interest, that engages people in activism and in changing the world, the way we saw in the 60s and 70s.
Getting to a point where we understand that because someone is different doesn't mean that they can't contribute. In fact, America has always taken in and absorbed and benefited from many of those differences, but we haven't been willing to treat the people that bring those values and those ideas here. We haven't been willing to treat them as peers until they acculturate, until they assimilate. I think that we have to redefine what we mean by progressivism. Look at it. We say progressive. We don't even say liberal anymore. It's a dirty word.
Oh no, I think.
In that instance where the murder victim was a gay man, and it was such a horrible anti-gay crime that it was particularly important that our voice be heard. The reasons we did that are pretty straightforward. First of all, we know that the legal system has enormous fallibility. Mistakes are made all the time. And in fact, that's a significant part of our work. As a civil rights organization dealing with homophobic bias in society and in the courts, we know that there are mistakes and that there's bias. There's bias from the U.S. Supreme Court, as we all saw in 1986 with the Georgia sodomy decision, the Bowers against Hardwick decision. The court didn't mince words. They said our claim to the same privacy right that everybody else takes for granted was facetious.
The appellate process is interesting, though, because if we try to eliminate that expense, as the legislatures in some states and the federal government is trying to do by limiting how much habeas corpus is available, we will start executing innocent people. Approximately 1 out of every 100 on death row is found to be innocent, actually innocent. It usually takes about 7 years to discover that. So if you bring habeas corpus down to 2 or 3 years, you have to be willing in that process to start executing innocent people.
I think this is a broader issue of how values in this society get codified in law, and how ideas about fairness, compassion, and justice, and, you know, including the response that people have to violence and to violent crime in a society that sanctions violence from the top.
These kinds of issues about tolerance get attacked at a very fundamental level, school by school by school.
School by school by school, and also it's really frightening to me in that they go ahead and argue that, you know, something about this so-called parents' rights. And again, parents certainly do have rights. They have rights to elect a local school board. They have a right to enroll their children in public school versus private school. But again, this particular, if you focus in on the actual issue, is there such a, does the law truly say that kids can't be exposed to gay issues? That's not true at all. I mean, again, what Norma and Cynthia are doing and all these other people are doing, they're just trying to talk about culture, they're talking about acceptance, they're talking about discrimination, they're trying to create a safe place for all kids. That's all that's going on, and that has nothing to do with sex education or sex.
I think that children are born loving, and children are born wanting warmth and wanting touch. Right? And I think they're taught to be intolerant. I think they're taught to hate. And we do have to kind of retrain them. And I think the earlier that we get in and start talking to them about diversity, I really don't like, I know the word is kind of tolerance, but I really don't like using tolerance. I so much more appreciate diversity and celebration, celebrating people for their differences. So I believe very much in getting in early with that message of, you know what you came up with and what you know to be real is what's right. And all that other stuff is stuff that you're learning and stuff that's coming from somewhere else, from outside of you. And that really fuels me, fuels my passion, and I love working with young people. I'm really inspired by young people.
I can't imagine that everybody would go, oh, isn't this wonderful? We're going to have, you know, plays about tolerance on the basis of race. Well, we can do that. That's okay. That's American now. But gay and lesbian stuff, I can't imagine everybody just welcomes, even if you call it tolerance, skits that have anything to do with our community.
Yes. Yes. Though the play includes tolerance based on religion and race and disability and class and gender and appearance, size, weight, the fact that we also say that it's important for people to be appreciative of diversity in families, that not all of us have a mom and a dad. Some of us have one mom or two moms, two dads, an older brother who might be gay. We say that everybody, with whatever family structure they have, needs to be treated with respect. And I think that there are sometimes families who think that to say that you have to respect someone no matter what their sexual orientation nor their family structure, is to start talking about what people do in the bedroom. And we don't go near that.
You know, even though we didn't start out 11 years ago to create an oral history of our community, it's been a tumultuous decade. And as it turned out, the individual stories of people in our community became the documentation of our history. We called these shows Voices of Our Lives.
I want to be part of creating. I will be one of some people who will be helping to create, I think, some unprecedented models for mobilizing the gay and lesbian community, for activating, for connecting our community-based infrastructure of organizations more into, parlaying it more into political, sort of more traditional political terms. And you know, it excites me. I think it's really necessary. I am very, very concerned about what's happening in this country. And I also feel we deeply need antidotes to the despair, the loss, the political disillusionment with Bill Clinton is fierce. the sense of having been let down at the same time as we continue to experience death after death after death, and the fragile ecology of our community, of our family networks, of our friendship networks, constantly being ripped apart by loss upon loss. And for me, if I've learned anything, it's that connecting to something larger than yourself can give you what Gandhi called that sort of transcendent sense of purpose, and creating a sense of, it's not just fighting back as an individual, but joining with others. And as one poet said, where hope and history come together.
I've been living with HIV disease for 15 years now. It's weird. I say that a lot, I guess. But I think I'm very, very lucky. You know, I'm going to be 40, and for the most part, I have lived a life that has been full of love. I have a family that has always been supportive. I have been fortunate with great friends. I have been lucky enough to spend my life doing work that I feel strongly about and passionate about. And I believe that I've made a difference. And I guess when you're that lucky, you have to give something back. There's a price for that. And I guess I just try to pay my dues.
I'm saying that we're at a turning point. I think that the passage of the welfare bill was a wake-up call for all of those who love justice and believe in progressive and liberal politics. If we can pass a piece of legislation that puts 1 million children into poverty and have it signed and not a peep be uttered, then something is seriously wrong. And just like in 1968, when older America remained silent as their sons and daughters were being shipped to Vietnam, and it was the youth of the world who woke us up, I think it's their turn. I think they have to save our children, save the poor, and once again awaken our conscience to the problems of this nation.
And what if they're saying to themselves, what's that got to do with me?
Well, it's got everything to do with you, because if you walk down the street and don't feel safe, it's most likely you don't feel safe because of drug abuse or poverty. If your taxes are going too high and going down the drain, it's most likely they're going too high because they're not being spent wisely, and we're not planning for the future. We're trying to do patchwork. If you can't swim in the river because it's polluted, it's because no one's doing anything about it. It has everything to do with you. It's the whole quality of life. You cannot build enough gated communities to protect yourself from the world you live in. It is our world, and it's our neighbors, and we're either going to accept responsibility for it or we're not.
You know what I feel a lot? I don't get on national TV all that often. Now you're putting me on this afternoon. I'm happy. Whenever I do, though, I get a call from the guys at Kelly's in Chicago saying, you look great, or a lesbian in Kansas that feels good about something, and that really excites me. The number of real people who say, you being there means something to me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's profound and fundamental. And then beyond that, I think it is saying, as a role model, and those get sort of hackneyed terms, but to say you too can do as well. We laughed today at committee, and you said you're near 60, I'm near 50. We're kind of moving along. We're doing pretty good for, I once said, for a couple of scruffy broads. But they're the 20-year-olds and the 30-year-olds, and look how they will be. So it is the mentoring and creating a foundation or an openness. I feel if I'm just kind of like wedging the door open, if I do nothing else to provide a doorstop to make an entrance, and by which the floodgates are open, then dozens of more, young, ambitious, capable lesbians and gays come forward, that will have been a lot.
When we look at the pages of the gay papers, this obsessive issue with vanity and what one looks like, liposuction and Botox this and muscles that, and where have we learned any lessons? Isn't there something that we need to solve and fix on the inside? Shouldn't we be looking at what's inside? I'm concerned. I'm concerned about my generation, and I'm concerned about the youngsters. The other thing is, I think that still young men are seroconverting because they want to be part of the club. They feel so ostracized, so less than, so disconnected. They want to become HIV positive, to become part of this fraternity. It looks good. It looks glamorous. There's support group. And I am so conscious of this that, you know, learn the lessons without becoming HIV positive. If I had it to do over again, I would have learned these lessons without seroconverting. The advantage here is to listen to people who have lost, and those from the grave who are sometimes speaking to us, like Paul Manette and Jim Pickett, etc. One need not seroconvert to feel powerful or to feel a part of. And I think that that's out there. I just think that when we act like AIDS is over, and I hear this repeatedly, and act like AIDS doesn't exist any longer, we are back into a state of delusion and denial that could only be matched by the early 80s as we end the 90s. And I think that we have to wake up all over again and reassess the issues, and particularly look at the youth.
I finally came to the realization that I really was attracted to men, and I felt that any woman who I was going to invest all that energy and trust in, and who was going to invest all her energy and trust in me, deserved better than a husband who was going to be running out to the Greyhound station every night, you know, looking for a hey sailor. And so I shut that part of my life off. I just said, this is not going to be, I'm not going to be able to live that way, honestly. And so I chose to live the gay way, which was the honest way for me. And a lot of gay men are repelled by women and have a real problem with women. And I adore them. I mean, I embrace them, and my closest business and personal relationships are with women. So, I mean, my manager is a woman, my agent's a woman, and Bette Midler is my longest standing business relationship. It's been almost 30 years. And she's several women.
At least.
This is not practice for something else. This is what I do. And I better have a good time doing it, or do something else. And I realize I do have a good time doing it. And if I want to do something else, it's within my power to do something else. But clearly, I'm doing what I like doing. And most people don't recognize that about themselves. They go to their graves denying that this is the real thing. And I think that barring some hideous misfortune, we have the power to give ourselves the real thing. And the sooner we do it, the happier we are.
In my first teaching assignment was an older woman who was a lesbian, who was very willing to talk to me about it, who told me I was a lesbian. I thought, what does she know? She says, you're a dyke, kid, you know. I said, but Carol, how would you know that? And she says, I know. And I remember that conversation. I wasn't offended. I just thought, you know, that's a kind of a crazy thing for her to say. But I was involved in starting the Women's Liberation Union in Los Angeles, which I would say was at least half lesbians. I had a lot of friendships with lesbians. I was very close to women. Women have been throughout my whole life. Women have been more important than men as friends, although I have male friends, but the women have been my closest comrades and allies throughout my life. And at some point, I was in the Bread and Roses Theater, and one of the lesbians began spending more and more time at my house, and one thing led to another, and we got into a relationship. And I was shocked that I did that. I really was, because it wasn't how I saw myself. I thought, what does this mean? Who am I?
To learn about every issue and to know your constituents, you know, it takes a lot of energy to do that, and we thank God that you are doing it for us. But we also know that there has to be time, I think, for the human person to reflect and to make some sense of it all. And I think that's really, in the best sense, what religion does, what spirituality does. It gives us that opportunity to reflect and to put what we do in a larger context, in relationship to other people, into relationship to society, and as a religious person, I believe in relationship to the force that, you know, creates the universe and keeps it nourished and going. And I really think that it also helps us clarify where we stand in terms of our ethics and our values and our morals. And I think in our community, that's a dialogue we sometimes don't have often enough with one another, let alone with anybody else. And I think that there is in our community a great thirst and hunger for that.
I had these 3 parts of my life, and in fact I divide the book into 3 sections. I was once Lily, the child of this unmarried immigrant woman who worked in the sweatshops, and then I became Lil, this tough adolescent who became a pinup model and later a stripper, and who frequented the very rough butch femme bars in Los Angeles. And then I became Lillian, this PhD who wanted to do lesbian scholarship. And I needed to figure out, coming to my age, and I started thinking about this a couple of years before I knew I was going to turn 60 soon. I needed to figure out how this diverse life came together. How did all of those parts make up whoever I am now? And that's what I try to do in the book. But I try to do it, I think, not just as me, but it's sort of a universal statement. That is, all of us have diverse parts of our lives. Where is the core? How do you find the core?
Well, just as in any family and any community, some of our friends are no longer with us. Here are 3 people we'll sorely miss.
And when Socrates says that an unexamined life is not worth living, he doesn't mean that the examined life is going to be easy, or the people are going to agree with it. You know, so you know, one has to be tough, and one has to not let it get under one's skin. And we do the most, I think, by being role models for one another. We barely had them when we were growing up. We are them for other people, and I think that's terribly important. And all the lies and all the not saying the truth that gay and lesbian people go through when they're 10 and 12 and 15 years old, they finally get a sense of, well, those people seem all right, and they, you know.
Well, that's the important thing. You know, somewhere there's a 17-year-old watching this show who wants to write and probably knows he's gay and is in the closet and scared to death. And I don't know whether watching you, he'll say, oh, now I can do it.
Right.
Because the difficulty of it is apparent. And yet, I heard you say, the joy of it, it sort of overcomes everything.
Oh, it does. It does. It's just, you never have to hate yourself in quite the same way again after you've come out. We've all said, well, who would choose to be gay? It's so tough. I think that we don't even have to say it that way, because you become so involved with a human struggle. Listen, what can you and I do about some kid in Somalia or some kid in the Sudan? The world is coming apart at the seams. And therefore, if you don't do something for someone, despair is the only thing that will happen.
And there's always something within our grasp to do.
That we have achieved. It's amazing to me to find that in many high schools and many colleges are gay and lesbian support groups, and good for them. I mean, I just think that the sooner that you can start understanding yourself for real, the better off you are.
Let no one allow you not to be yourself. Be yourself. It's the most important lesson we can learn. It's the most important thing we can do. And we all know who our self is if we'll listen to the quiet, still voice inside. Not that committee up in your head, because they make a lot of noise. But all of us, I think, have that quiet, still, spiritual voice that tells us how to be ourselves. And I ask folks to just listen to that, and you have to practice and become studied at it before you can hear the voice, because we try to discount it. and you know, nah, nothing like that exists. But it does exist, and it exists in all of us, and it'll guide us through every path we need to take.
If you're gay, nobody knows that. The attending physician, the midwife, the mother, the father, the minister, nobody knows that. Nobody knows that except you. And you learn that before you're 3 years old. And you also learn there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing that you mention with any pride because you get beaten up or thrown out or so on. And so the first 18 years of our life are a period of great denial. Mm-hmm. If only we could find out how to cut through that. If only we could say to non-gay people, please allow us to be brothers and sisters to our young brother and sister. I swear we won't molest. We just will love. If only we could break through that, then we could go to total liberation, to total restart. But we can't, and I challenge out there everybody, the philosophers of the world, help us to find out how to deal with our younger brothers and sisters, that we can love them and not be arrested.
What lesson would you want to leave with our viewers about the way you've lived your life and what recommends it?
Never again. Never again will we be treated as sick, sinful, deviant, variant. We're whole, we're gestalt, we're achieving, we're earning, we're learning, we're mobilizing, we're real, we're of service. We have something to offer the world. And we invite them to share it with us, to welcome us to the table, that at the table we can all be co-equal. Get used to it.
Yeah, get used to it. You know, a lot of people have asked me where the title of our show came from. And as with so many things in our community, of course it came from a chant. We were marching, or we were sitting in, or we were demonstrating, and we used this chant. We're here, we're queer, get used to it. And it became the signature sign-off line for our show as well. Please go to the march. If you don't go to Washington, do something here, just do something. And get used to it. Thanks a lot. About any of these issues, just get used to it. We better get used to it. Get used to it. Get used to it. Get used to it. Remember, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. And so for the 100th time, and since we'll be here for the next 100, 200, or 300, I'll say to you, just get used to it.